My name is Ethan, and last winter I learned the hard way that isolation can become something far worse than peace and quiet. I'd taken my wife, Sarah, to the Colorado mountains for a photography project. Snow, light, silence, all the things my work thrived on. She wanted skiing, I wanted solitude. So we compromised and rented a tiny remote cabin instead of staying at a resort. The place wasn't glamorous, 4 rooms, creaking floors, a cheap gas fireplace, but it had charm. It was tucked deep into the pines at the end of a half-mile unpaved road. No neighbors, no noise, no light except what we brought with us. For the first few days, it was perfect. She skied. I took photos. We cooked simple dinners and went to sleep early. The cabin felt like a cozy retreat from reality. Then the storm hit. Mountain storms are different, louder, thicker, more suffocating. It began as a soft snowfall, but by noon, the world outside turned into a whiteout wall. Snow climbed 3 feet up the door. The windows iced over so deeply that we couldn't see more than a faint blue blur of daylight. We were trapped, though we never used the word. Sarah shrugged it off. "Wine and Scrabble," she said cheerfully. I tried to relax, but storms always did weird things to my nerves. That evening, while cleaning the kitchen, I noticed something small but jarring. My camera bag wasn't where I left it. I'd set it right beside the mudroom door when we came in. Now it sat in the middle of the doorway, like someone had dragged it out and dropped it. "Did you move this?" I asked Sarah. "Nope." "Did you kick it with your boot?" "Maybe I did." She shook her head. The bag was heavy canvas with steel buckles. It wouldn't have slid on its own. Still, I chalked it up to uneven floors and forced myself not to overthink it. But the next night, something else happened. Around 3 a.m., I got up for the bathroom. The cabin was pitch black, except for a sliver of moonlight bleeding through the ice-covered windows. As I walked through the living room, my eyes locked on something hanging under the wall thermostat, a small wooden pine tree carving we'd bought at a roadside stand on the way up. I remembered putting it in my shaving kit. In the bathroom, I touched it. It was swinging slightly, as if recently placed. I found my shaving kit open. The carving was missing. I woke Sarah, whispering as calmly as I could. "Did you hang that wooden tree in the living room?" She groaned, barely awake. "No, Ethan. Go back to sleep." That stone-cold denial hit me hard. Someone had moved something while we slept. I put the carving back where it belonged, but sleep didn't come easy after that. I told myself I was being paranoid. The next day proved I wasn't. The storm had finally stopped. The sun fought through the clouds, faint but enough to light the world. I stepped out to capture the cabin under a fresh layer of snow. Everything looked untouched, beautiful, clean, until I walked around back. Just beneath the mudroom window was a set of footprints. One set, one person. Heavy, deep, fresh. They weren't mine, they weren't Sarah's. And based on the sharp edges, they'd been made recently, likely that morning. Someone had walked right up to our cabin during the storm, stood outside the window, and then walked back into the forest. My breath fogged in front of me. The silence turned threatening. Inside, Sarah didn't panic. She didn't believe me. "Probably a ranger checking on the property," she said. "In boots that big, standing at the mudroom window? It's the wilderness, Ethan. Don't overreact." That dismissal snapped something in me. I threw my boots back on and stomped outside. If she wouldn't believe me, I'd gather proof myself. I followed the prints into the woods. They led straight and deliberate, as if the person had known exactly where they were going. They brought me to a rocky ridge overlooking our cabin, an almost perfect vantage point. And then the tracks just ended. No return prints, no scramble marks, no path forward. The final set of deep impressions simply stopped at the edge of the ridge, like the person had stepped to the ledge, looked down at our home, and vanished. My heartbeat drummed in my ears. The woods had gone silent. Too silent. I retreated to the cabin fast, slamming the door behind me. "That's it," I said. "We're leaving." Before Sarah could respond, the ceiling lights flickered twice, then went black. The gas fireplace sputtered and died, plunging us into a darkness so complete it felt physical. "Power outage," Sarah whispered, though her voice had finally lost its calm. And then we heard it, a scraping sound. Slow, heavy, deliberate, coming from the roof. Someone was walking above us. We froze. The footsteps dragged across the metal roof, scraping long, rough grooves. Then came a thud, a low grunt, a strained breath. "Someone's on the cabin," I whispered, gripping Sarah's arm. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. We both heard the next sound clearly. Floorboards creaking in the mudroom. Inside the cabin, right next to the kitchen, the mudroom door latch rattled softly, testing. Not forcing, testing. Whoever it was wasn't afraid of being heard. We backed into the bedroom, barricading the door with the wooden dresser. I grabbed the fireplace poker as a weapon. The silence outside the room was worse than any noise, thick, expectant. Then came the soft thudding, not trying to break in, just knocking. Announcing. And beneath it, a whisper, a quiet, stretched-out murmur, slow and intimate, like someone breathing a secret directly through the crack under the door. "Eitan." My blood turned to ice. We stayed like that until morning. When we finally opened the door, the cabin was empty except for one thing. In the center of the mudroom, placed upright like a gift, was a giant snow-covered boot, exactly the size of the prints outside. We didn't pack carefully. We didn't clean. We sprinted to the car, hearts hammering. As we reached the tree line, Sarah touched my arm. "Ethan, look." Nailed to a pine tree was our small wooden carving, but someone had carved a stick figure into it. A stick figure with a perfectly hollow circle for a head. We left Colorado and never returned. But even now, sometimes I still hear that whisper behind me when a room gets too quiet. "Eitan." We left the mountain that morning like people fleeing a burning house. Neither of us said a word during the drive. It wasn't until we reached the nearest town 2 hours and one terrifyingly silent road later that Sarah finally spoke. Whoever that was, they were watching us. It was the first time she acknowledged it, but hearing her say it didn't make me feel better. It made everything worse. We got a hotel room and spent the day pretending to rest. I sat on the edge of the bed replaying the sound that had haunted us all night. The soft rhythmic thud, 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 followed by the whisper that curled like frozen breath through the doorframe. "Eitan." Someone knew my name. Someone had stood outside our bedroom door in the dark, whispering it. Someone big enough to leave deep boot prints in 3 feet of snow. And someone patient enough to stand on our roof, wait for the power to die, and enjoy the silent terror of watching us break. We went home the next morning, but home didn't feel like home anymore. For weeks, I would wake up at random hours, convinced I'd heard that same soft dragging of boots across a roof, or the faint whisper of my name drifting through the hallway. My wife told me it was trauma. My therapist said it was a stress response. But late one night, as I sat in the dark editing photos, I heard something from the living room, a soft shift of weight on the floorboards. Not loud, not aggressive, just enough. I grabbed the nearest object, a chair, and crept toward the sound. But when I flicked on the light, nothing was there. No one. The house was still. Except my camera bag had moved again. Not far, just rotated, like someone had knelt beside it. Examined it, placed it back carefully. I told myself it was Sarah. I told myself anything I needed to stay sane. But doubt was rooting itself in my chest, spreading slow and cold like frost. A few days later, something happened that made me realize the cabin incident hadn't ended in Colorado. Sarah and I had gone to the grocery store. When we returned, there was something placed neatly on our welcome mat. The snow-covered boot, the exact same boot from the cabin. Frozen, heavy, and upright. Sarah screamed. I felt my blood solidify. There was no rational explanation for it. We hadn't brought it home. It had been left in the cabin, sitting in the mudroom. And now it was at our front door, 900 miles away. On the boot's toe, carved deep through the frozen leather, was a familiar shape. A stick figure with a hollow circle for a head, just like the carving nailed to the pine tree. We called the police this time. 2 officers came, looked at the boot, asked us a few questions, and wrote down our statements with bored expressions. They theorized it was some disturbed hiker from Colorado who followed us home. But they didn't believe that theory, and neither did we. We got cameras installed, alarm systems, motion lights. For a while, that gave me a little peace. Until one night, the alarm didn't go off, but someone still got onto our porch. It happened at 3:17 a.m. I woke up to a sound that snapped every nerve in my body awake. A whisper. Not outside. Not in the hallway. But on the other side of our bedroom window, Eitan. Sarah grabbed my arm so tightly her nails dug into my skin. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. Then came the scraping. Long, slow, deliberate drags across the siding, exactly like the scraping we heard on the cabin roof. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, but before I could dial, the sound stopped. We stayed frozen until dawn. In the morning, I walked outside with shaking legs. There were no footprints in the grass, no marks in the dirt, no sign anyone had been there. But carved into the frost on our bedroom window were 3 letters: ETH, and the hollow circle. I didn't go back inside right away. I stood in the driveway, staring at the frost carving, trying to piece together something that made sense. The cabin, the moved objects, the prints that ended on a ridge, the whispers, the scraping, the boot that followed us across states, the figure carved into wood, and now my initials carved into my own house. None of this was random. None of it was impulsive. This wasn't a hiker or an intruder. This was someone with patience. Obsessive patience. Someone who enjoyed watching fear grow layer by layer. I went inside and packed. We moved in with my brother, then we moved again, then again. 3 times in 6 months. Every new place was further away, more crowded, more monitored. Cameras, locks, dogs, you name it. But paranoia is a poison that doesn't fade. In every new house, I'd wake up some nights convinced I heard that same soft knocking on the walls. Sometimes I'd hear snow sliding off the roof and freeze in terror. Sometimes I'd see a tall shape in the corner of my eye when I looked at reflective surfaces, something with broad shoulders and a stillness too familiar to ignore. But the worst moment came last week. Sarah and I had finally started to feel normal again. We'd been living in a townhouse for 4 months, our longest stretch without incident. We even laughed again, watched movies again, slept with the lights off again. But on Tuesday morning, Sarah found something sitting at the base of our stairs. The wooden pine tree carving. Our carving, the one that had been defaced in Colorado. But this time, the hollow circle wasn't empty. A single word had been etched into it. Window. My veins flooded with ice. Window. Where he whispered. Where he carved my initials. Where he stood, unseen. When I read that word, something inside me collapsed. The realization settled like a stone in my stomach. He hadn't lost us. He hadn't stopped. He had only waited, watched, studied, and he wanted us to know it. Now, every night, I lie awake listening for whispers in the walls. Every time a branch scrapes the siding, my whole body stiffens. Every reflective surface I pass, I check the corners for a tall, unmoving silhouette. I don't know what he wants. I don't know why us. I don't even know if he's fully human. But I know one thing with a certainty that keeps me awake at night. He'll come back during the next storm. And this time, he won't whisper from the other side of the door. He'll whisper from the inside. I've spent 2 decades on the road as a regional sales rep. Long highways, long winters, and long stretches of nothing but snow-covered plains. I thought I'd seen every kind of Midwest nightmare the weather could throw at me. But last winter proved I hadn't seen anything. My name's Mark, and this happened during a drive from Minneapolis to Fargo with a new hire named Linda. She was the cheerful type, almost aggressively optimistic. I didn't mind it. It made the hours pass faster. The sky was quiet that morning, a frozen pale blue above endless white fields, the radio buzzing in and out of static. Then the weather alert came. An Alberta clipper was coming earlier than expected. Fast winds, blizzard conditions, near zero visibility. Before we had time to joke about it, it was already on top of us. 1 second we were cruising on dry asphalt. The next, the world vanished in a swirling white hell. I could barely see the hood of my car, and the wind was pushing us side to side like the vehicle weighed nothing. Linda went quiet, gripping the armrest, staring out at nothing but blinding snow. I caught the faded outline of a sign, the junction, a gas station, and motel combo. The kind of place that hadn't been updated since the 80 seconds, and had probably only survived because people like us occasionally got caught in storms. I pulled into the lot at a crawl, snow hammering against the windshield. There was only one operational pump, flickering under a sickly yellow lamp. I stepped out into the storm, the wind cutting across my face like a razor blade. As I started filling up the tank, Linda tapped on the window from inside and pointed. That's when I noticed him, A figure, standing at the very edge of the light, completely still. His outline was rigid, almost unnatural against the blowing snow. I squinted, expecting him to wave or shout for help, but he didn't react at all. He just watched the car, unmoving. "Is that a hitchhiker?" Linda shouted through the cracked window. "I guess," I said. Strange place to be standing. He finally began walking toward us, slow, deliberate steps. As he came closer, details took shape. Tall, bundled in a dark coat, wearing a black knit hat. No backpack. No suitcase. No sign he'd been walking through the storm. And something about him, I don't know how to explain it. He didn't move like a man freezing in a snowstorm. He walked like the cold didn't bother him at all. Linda was already pushing her door open. "We can't leave him out there. He'll die." "Linda, wait," I said, grabbing her arm. Something's off, but she had already made up her mind. He reached the driver's side window and stared in at me. His skin looked pale, too pale. His eyes were sunk into shadow, as if he hadn't slept in days, or like there was nothing behind them at all. I hesitated before cracking the window. "You all right, sir? Where you headed?" For a moment, he didn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was a rasping whisper. "West. Just west. Cold. We're staying here until the storm passes," I said, nodding toward the cheap motel. "We can take you somewhere tomorrow." He shook his head. "No room, just warmth. Let me wait in the back of the car." Linda didn't hesitate. "Of course! Get in!" My instincts screamed at me. Every internal alarm I had blared in unison. But I didn't want to look like the heartless salesman. I unlocked the door. He climbed in without another word, slumped sideways against the window, and pulled a blanket over his legs. He didn't even close his eyes, just stared out the window at the snow as if watching something out there. We checked into the motel. The clerk barely looked up from his paperwork, neck encased in a medical brace. He gave us 2 adjoining rooms, the only ones that still had working heat. When we told the hitchhiker to come inside, he refused. "Just the car, warm enough." Linda brushed it off as pride or embarrassment. I didn't buy that for a second. She went to her room. I went to mine. But even with the door locked, the curtains drawn, and the television on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Around midnight, I realized I wasn't going to sleep. I decided to grab my emergency flare kit from the trunk, something familiar, something grounding. I stepped outside into the dim walkway, snow drifting in under the flickering lights. As I passed Linda's window, I noticed the curtains slightly parted. She was awake, scrolling on her tablet. Then I reached my car. I leaned toward the back window, expecting to see him asleep. I froze. The blanket was still there, but the hitchhiker was gone. At first I thought he might have gone into the motel without saying anything. Then I noticed something else, something that turned my stomach into ice. The inside of the window was fogged up from the heat, but someone had wiped it clean in small, perfect circles. Not smudges, not streaks, just dozens of deliberate fingertip-sized circles, as if someone had been peering out through them, watching the rooms. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it over the wind. Then I saw it, a motel stationery card, folded and neatly propped against the headrest. I unlocked the car with shaking hands and snatched the note. 4 words. "Your door is unlocked." I felt the blood drain from my body. I didn't look back at the trees. I didn't look for footprints. I just ran. I slammed into my room, locked everything, and started banging on the adjoining door like a madman. "Linda, wake up, something's wrong." Her door clicked open a crack, her face pale and confused. "What happened?" "The hitchhiker, he's gone," I whispered. "He left this." I handed her the note. She stared at it for several long seconds. "What does it mean?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, but deep down I knew. The note wasn't a warning. It was a message, and it meant he'd already been inside. Linda and I stood frozen in that dim, stained motel room, her clutching the note, me staring at the floor like it might open up beneath us. The wind outside wailed through the thin walls, and for a moment neither of us breathed. "Mark," she whispered, "are you sure he didn't just walk off?" I shook my head. He couldn't have. The car doors were locked. I checked. And the windows, those circles he was watching us. We checked both room doors again, deadbolts engaged, security latches slid in place. Nothing looked tampered with, but the fear in my gut wouldn't settle. Linda eventually returned to her room, though she left the connecting door unlocked, just in case. I sat on the edge of my bed, fully dressed, listening. The storm had calmed just enough that the motel's creaking became painfully noticeable. Every shift in the building made me flinch. Then it started. A faint scratching beneath the floor. Not the walls. Not outside. Directly below us. At first I thought maybe an animal had crawled under the building. Old places like this always had pests. But Linda's knock came seconds later. "Mark, did you hear that?" Before I could answer, the scratching stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum. It vibrated through the bed frame, up through the floorboards. The sound was strange, too mechanical to be an animal, too irregular to be plumbing. Then came the voice, muffled, wet-sounding, like someone speaking with a soaked cloth over their mouth. "Open, open." Linda's eyes widened with a horror I'd never seen on anyone's face. She backed away from the carpet, shaking her head. No, Mark. There's someone down there." The humming grew louder, angrier. The boards quivered, and then came the crack. A small section of floor between our beds splintered upwards, forming a jagged gap. From that darkness, something pale forced its way through. A finger. Thin, bone white, trembling, like it was feeling for us. Linda screamed. I shouted. The finger twitched violently, and I could hear the rest of the hand scraping beneath the wood, desperate to push through. I grabbed the heaviest thing near me, my briefcase, and slammed it down with every ounce of strength I had. A sickening crunch. The finger bent, unnaturally, disappearing back into the darkness. Everything went instantly silent. "Run," I shouted. We didn't stop to think, didn't take luggage. Linda ran to the window and fought with the latch until it snapped open. A blast of snow slammed into the room. She climbed out first. I scrambled after her, scraping my hip on the sill. We landed in a drift, half sinking, then staggered toward the car. The wind whipped around us, and I couldn't help glancing back. Our room window curtain ripped, stood open to the storm, and someone was standing inside. The hitchhiker, dry, calm, wearing nothing heavier than an open shirt. He wasn't watching us flee. He was staring down at his hands with a satisfied, almost relieved expression, like he'd found what he'd come for, like hurting himself had been nothing but an inconvenience. A small, cold smile crept across his face. I got the car started on the third try, the engine whining like it didn't want to live through the night either. Snow blasted the windshield, but I drove anyway, tires sliding, the motel fading behind us. We didn't speak for almost an hour. When the storm finally thinned and visibility returned, Linda turned toward me. Her voice was barely audible. "Mark, before you pounded on the door earlier, I checked your room." I glanced at her. "What about it?" She swallowed. "Your main door was open. Not the deadbolt, the latch. It was standing wide open." I jerked the car to the shoulder, the tires skidding on slush. My breath felt lodged in my throat. He had been in my room, not watching from outside. He was inside. That note wasn't a warning. It wasn't cautionary. It was mocking. "Your door is unlocked." As in, I've already been in there. We got back on the road and didn't stop until we hit Fargo. Neither of us slept. Neither of us reported anything. What would we tell police? That a man disappeared from a locked car and tried to claw his way through a motel floor? They'd laugh us out of the station. We finished the sales trip in silent survival mode. A month later, both of us quit. I couldn't handle the travel anymore. Linda couldn't stay on the road at all. But here's the part I've never told anyone. 2 weeks after we resigned, I drove past the junction again just to prove to myself it was all in my head. The gas station was boarded up. The motel was condemned. Snow had blown halfway up the doors, but something was written across the frost-covered office window. Just a few words, etched with a fingertip from inside the building. Still warm inside. I didn't stop the car, didn't slow down, didn't blink. Now, whenever I stay in a hotel, no matter how modern or safe, I check everything. The door, the lock, the windows, the vents. I look under the bed, behind the curtains, and yes. Sometimes I press my ear to the floor, just to make sure there's nothing beneath it. Because I learned something in that storm, something I can't unlearn. There are things out there that don't want shelter from the cold. They want entry. They wait for storms because storms hide their footsteps. And the moment you act polite, the moment you ignore that instinct in your gut, that's when they come inside. My story is about a long, lonely winter spent house-sitting for my wealthy and eccentric Uncle Arthur. He owned an isolated 3-story cabin deep in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state. It was more of a fortress than a house, built from thick cedar logs and huge panels of structural glass, overlooking a remote, desolate valley the locals called Blind Pass. I took the job because I was broke, and Uncle Arthur was paying a fortune to have someone stay there, feed his 2 enormous, placid Newfoundland dogs, named Bear and Shadow, and make sure the place didn't freeze over. The rule was simple. Stay until the spring thaw. Do not leave the property, and do not let anyone in. He was a paranoid man, but his money was good. I arrived in late November, just as the first serious snow began to fall. The house was magnificent, with state-of-the-art security, a ring of perimeter cameras, motion sensors, and an industrial-grade steel front door. The only connection to the outside world was a satellite phone with a limited data plan and a landline, which was only used for emergencies. The first month was paradise. It was a life of silent reading, playing chess against the computer, and long, solitary walks with the dogs along the snowed-in access road. The valley below was always quiet, a vast white blanket of untouched snow, framed by endless dark pine forests. Then, just before Christmas, the weather turned biblical. A relentless storm, the kind that makes the news, slammed into the Cascades, trapping me completely. Snow piled up to the second-floor windows, and the wind screamed like a tortured spirit. I was truly, utterly alone, which was, initially, a source of comfortable curiosity. The shift began on Christmas Day. I was sitting by the colossal stone fireplace, watching a downloaded movie, when the landline phone rang. It was an old-fashioned, rotary dial phone, and its ring was a harsh, jarring sound that cut through the silence. I picked it up on the second ring. "Hello? This is the Arthur residence." The only response was a low, staticky hiss. I assumed it was a cross line or a weather-related malfunction. I was about to hang up when a voice, flat and entirely devoid of emotion, spoke. The silence is loud. It was a man's voice, not my uncle's, and it was unnervingly close, as if he were standing just outside the front door, speaking into an intercom. "I'm sorry, who is this?" I asked, my blood suddenly cold. "Just a traveler. Lost," the voice replied. "The road is gone. We need shelter." "I'm sorry. This is a private residence, and the road is completely impassable. You need to call emergency services. They can airlift you out," I said, trying to sound firm and reasonable. "We have no phone. We saw your lights. We have been watching the valley for days. Your lights are a beacon. The dogs are beautiful," the voice said, the last sentence delivered with the same flat, chilling monotone as the rest. I looked at Bear and Shadow, who were sleeping peacefully on the rug. They hadn't barked. They hadn't even lifted their heads. My uncertainty turned instantly to dread. This wasn't a lost hiker. This was a direct, observed threat. "I need you to leave the property now," I said, my hand gripping the heavy receiver. "We will not leave. We can't. But we won't try the main door. Too heavy. We will try the glass. On the second floor." "You forgot to lock the glass slider," the voice said, and then a dry, unsettling chuckle that ended abruptly. The line went dead. I dropped the phone and ran up the spiral staircase. The chalet's main feature was a row of 6 huge, tempered glass sliding doors that opened onto a long balcony on the second floor. I had spent hours photographing the valley view through them. I checked every one. They were all locked. But as I reached the last door on the far end, the one overlooking the thickest part of the forest, I saw something that turned my stomach. Scraped into the deep snow on the balcony, right outside the glass, were 3 neat, parallel lines. Someone had been standing out there, and they had just, casually, run 3 lines down the length of the balcony with a finger or a small stick. It was a horrifying sign of presence, a silent message that they had been there, they had seen me, and they knew the structure of the house. I looked down at the snowdrifts below the balcony. They were massive, easily 15 feet high, banked right up against the house. It would have been a near impossible, hours-long climb, but someone had done it. The fear was paralyzing. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know how they knew about the slider lock, a lie, but a perfect psychological trigger. And I didn't know why the dogs hadn't reacted. I ran back downstairs and found the security monitor. I frantically cycled through the camera feeds. The perimeter cameras were entirely blinded by the storm. The screens were nothing but static snow. The motion sensors were useless, either buried or constantly triggered by the swirling snow. The house was truly blind. I grabbed the satellite phone and tried to call the police. The satellite connection, reliable until now, was dead. The heavy, wet snow and ice had likely knocked the dish out of alignment or covered it entirely. I was trapped in a house with a voice that knew my location, knew the dogs, and knew how to climb a snowdrift taller than a bus. I spent the next 48 hours in an adrenaline-fueled state of high alert. I secured every door and window, barricading the second-floor slider with the heaviest piece of furniture I could find, my uncle's antique bronze telescope stand. Bear and Shadow continued to sleep and eat as if nothing were wrong, their placid indifference adding another layer of psychological horror. Were they deaf, or had they accepted this person's presence? The only time the phone rang was once every 12 hours. Exactly. Always the same voice. Always the same chilling, monotonous cadence. The telescope is a beautiful distraction. I had spent an hour looking through it. You should not reheat fish, it smells. I had microwaved leftover salmon. The golden retriever would have barked, Uncle Arthur's previous dog. Each call was a new piece of evidence that they were not just near the house, but observing the smallest, most intimate details of my life. They were patient. They were close. And worst of all, they were silent, except for the calls. The breaking point came late on the third night. I was huddled in the kitchen, the most structurally sound room, holding a heavy, iron fireplace grate. I was exhausted, having not slept for 3 days. The phone rang. 11:58 p.m., right on schedule. I picked it up, my hands shaking. I was beyond screaming. I just wanted the truth. What do you want? To be warm, the voice replied. Then, it added something new, something that caused a full-blown mental panic. We are coming into the mudroom now. There is a way in, a very small way in. The mudroom. It was a forgotten utility closet off the kitchen, with a small high-up vent for the dryer exhaust, a 6-inch metal flap leading outside. It was the only unbarred opening in the entire structure. No human could fit, but the voice's calm certainty crushed my last shred of self-control. You're lying. No one can fit in the vent, I screamed into the phone. The voice didn't respond with a challenge. Instead, it whispered a name. Arthur. The phone dropped from my hand, clattering onto the counter. I didn't care about the vent. I cared about the name. Arthur. That was my uncle's name, but the voice had whispered it with a familiarity that suggested intimacy or possession. I turned slowly toward the hallway leading to the mudroom, and that's when I saw it. Shadow, the smaller of the two Newfoundlands, was standing in the doorway, blocking the passage to the mudroom, and he was not sleeping. He was rigid, all 4 legs locked, his head lowered, and he was making the lowest, most terrifying growl I have ever heard. A deep, constant, guttural rumble that didn't sound like a dog at all. And right behind Shadow, just visible around the corner of the wall, I saw it. A small, dark shape, about the size of a football, rolling silently across the floor toward the vent. I screamed and lunged for the dog, pulling him back violently. As I did, the dark shape disappeared with a quiet, sickening scuttle into the darkness of the mudroom. I kicked the mudroom door shut and threw the heavy iron grate against it, securing it with a massive, antique steel vise my uncle used for repairs. My survival instinct had taken over completely. I was sealing myself off. I looked at the dog. Shadow was quiet now, his head tilted, his massive dark eyes staring into the dark corner of the kitchen. And then he did the most human thing. He turned and looked at me with a profound, terrifying expression, not of fear, but of profound reflection, as if to say, "It's already here, you idiot." I fled the kitchen, pulling Bear and Shadow with me, and locked myself in the master bedroom, which was on the 3rd floor, with a double-reinforced door and no external windows. I sat there for the rest of the night, listening to the silence. No calls, no footsteps, no scraping. Just the wind and the knowledge that something small, dark, and utterly foreign was somewhere in the lower part of the house, patiently waiting. The next morning, the snow stopped. The sun was out, blindingly bright, and the world was utterly silent. I spent an hour trying to get the satellite phone to work, and finally, miraculously, I got a dial tone. I called my uncle, Arthur. "I need to leave. Someone has been watching the house. They're inside," I said, my voice hoarse. Arthur was calm, too calm. "Just leave the dogs. Lock the main door." The thaw is coming. You're fine. They knew your name. They whispered it on the phone. Arthur. And they were coming through the dryer vent. A long silence on the line. Then, Arthur sighed. A tired, old man's sigh. James, the dryer vent. It's a decoy. It's not the way in. It's the way out, he said. Listen to me very carefully. When you leave, do not look in the mudroom. Do not. Just take the snowmobile and go. Lock everything. But what about what was in there? I pleaded. It's just a creature of the cold, James. Harmless, until it finds its warmth. That's why I hired you. I need the house occupied, and I needed an observer. You were an expensive canary, Arthur said, the same cold, flat tone as the man on the phone. Now go, before it gets too comfortable. I hung up, feeling a wave of nausea and a terrible persistent fear I had not been a caretaker, but bait. I packed nothing but my warmest clothes. I kissed Bear and Shadow goodbye, not wanting to put them in the snowmobile. I walked past the kitchen, past the bolted mudroom door, and out the steel front door. I drove the snowmobile for 3 hours until I hit the first plowed road. I didn't stop. I never looked back. I never asked Arthur for the rest of my pay, and I never spoke to him again. I'm fine now, but the silence of an empty house is something I can no longer tolerate. I live in a city apartment, where the constant noise is a comfort. The silence of the valley was not a lack of sound. It was the sound of something waiting, something that could see, something that could whisper your host's name, and something that was willing to use you as a human furnace. And I still wonder, was the voice on the phone Arthur, playing a cruel, controlling game? Or was it the creature of the cold, using my uncle's name, having found its warmth, and settling in for a long, patient winter? I don't know the answer, but every winter, when the snow falls, I have the same terrifying thought. I left the dryer vent open, and whatever it was, it used it as the way out, and it's looking for a new observer. It started last winter, mid-December. My cousin Nate had this idea to spend a weekend at his family's old hunting cabin near Lake Superior. The place had been abandoned for years, built by his dad back in the late 82nds, and he called it a digital detox. No internet, no real cell service, just a wood stove, a few beers, and a couple quiet days in the woods. I was hesitant because the timing sucked. Roads were icy, snowstorms every few days, but Nate wouldn't shut up about it. Said he needed to clear his head after his breakup, and that I owed him one for missing his birthday. So I said, screw it. The drive up was worse than either of us expected. The last few miles were all winding forest road, barely plowed, no cell service. Snow was falling in thick sheets, and the trees looked like black walls on both sides. Every now and then we'd see a deer dart through the headlights and vanish into the dark, and both of us would flinch. By the time we got to the cabin, it was almost 9 p.m. The place was buried halfway up the porch in snow. No footprints, no tire tracks, just untouched white. Inside smelled like damp wood and animal piss. The first thing we noticed was the cold, not regular cold. It felt wrong somehow, heavier, like it didn't belong inside. We got the generator going. Thank God it still worked, and the little place started to warm up. Nate cracked a beer, joked about how we were real mountain men now. We played a few hands of cards, made some soup on the propane stove, and eventually passed out on the fold-out couch. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The generator had stopped. Everything was quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Dead quiet. Like the air itself had stopped moving. I remember sitting up and instantly getting this feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't explain it. My body just knew. When I went outside to restart the generator, my flashlight caught something in the snow, a trail of prints circling the cabin, barefoot, human-shaped but off somehow. The toes were longer, the stride uneven, like whoever made them had been dragging one leg. They went all the way around the cabin and disappeared into the woods. I woke Nate up. He stumbled outside with me, half asleep, swearing I was overreacting until he saw them himself. He crouched down to look closer, and I swear I saw his breath catch when he realized how deep they went. Like whoever made them weighed a lot. We locked the doors, piled some firewood in front of the entrance, and tried to pretend it was fine. We barely slept. The next morning the snow had stopped, but the air felt heavier. There was this strange smell, not quite rot, not quite metal, but sharp enough to burn in your nose. We ate a quick breakfast and decided to leave early. But when we went outside, the truck wouldn't start. The battery wasn't just dead, it was gone, like it had been pulled out cleanly. The weirdest part? The hood wasn't even damaged. The latch was still locked, like something had just lifted it open. There were drag marks in the snow leading off toward the trees. He grabbed a hatchet from the shed and said he was going to follow the tracks, just a little way. I told him not to, that we should stay put until someone found us. But he was stubborn like that. He didn't come back. I waited for maybe 20 minutes before I went after him. There were new prints now, his mixed with the others. I followed them about 20 yards before the trees got thicker and the light dimmed. Then I noticed the smell again. Stronger this time. Something was hanging from a branch ahead, part of Nate's flannel sleeve, torn clean off. And below it, the snow was soaked dark. At least, it looked like blood. Later, when the snow melted and refroze, it was gone. Maybe that's why the search team didn't find any sign of it, but in that moment, it was enough to make me freeze in place. That's when I heard him. Or at least, I thought it was him. He said my name, soft at first, then louder. It sounded like it was coming from deeper in the woods, but the echo didn't sound right. It was like the voice was inside my head instead of around me. Nate had shouted my name earlier when he left, so at first I thought maybe he was still close. I called back, but there was only silence. Then I saw it. It was standing between two trees, hunched but still taller than any person should be. Its skin was stretched tight, grayish, and thin enough to show ribs. The head looked human at first, but the jaw was too long, like it had been broken and never healed. When it opened its mouth, I could see black around its gums, and something wet and red dripping from the corners. It stepped forward, and the sound it made wasn't footsteps. It was more like cracking branches inside the snow. I don't remember running, but I must have. I just remember the feeling of my lungs tearing apart in the cold air, and the moment I saw the road, a narrow stretch of white cutting through the trees. I didn't stop until I hit pavement, maybe 2 miles away. When I finally got to a gas station, I called the sheriff's office. They told me the roads were blocked by fallen trees, and they couldn't get a plow up there until the storm cleared. They sent a team 2 days later, once it was finally passable. They found the cabin. They found the truck. They found Nate's phone, frozen and half buried about a mile from the property. But no Nate, no blood trail, nothing else. They said maybe a bear got him. I didn't argue. That was 8 months ago. I've moved 3 times since then. Different cities, different apartments. I don't tell people why. I don't even tell my family the full story. They think I'm still dealing with trauma and making things up in my head. Maybe they're right. But sometimes I wonder if it followed my scent, or if I brought something back from that place without realizing it. 2 nights ago, I woke up around 3:47 a.m. Someone was whispering my name from the hallway. I live alone. When I finally got the courage to look, the whispering stopped. But right under my bedroom window, on the patch of frozen mud, there were footprints, barefoot, human-shaped, and just slightly too long, like the same ones from that night in the snow, perfectly preserved, like whatever made them hadn't walked here. It had just appeared. Winter brings things to the world that people don't really understand, unless they've experienced it themselves. The cold isn't the worst part. It's the way winter compresses everything, the land, the sky, the silence, until you feel like you're trapped inside a pressure cooker with whatever else is out there, whatever else has managed to survive the cold. This happened when I was working as a contract worker for a geological survey company. They sent small teams to remote monitoring stations in the off-season, and that's how I ended up snowmobiling 40 miles into the Montana wilderness with 2 guys I barely knew, Mark and Ben. Our mission was simple on paper: 2 weeks at an unmarked maintenance outpost. Check the seismic monitoring equipment, keep the solar array running, and clear enough snow so the company could pretend the place was still up and running in mid-January. The station wasn't actually supposed to be operational until May, but the company liked making money, and the government would pay extra if the station could operate through the winter. The outpost itself was a single metal bunker, painted a sickly institutional green, sitting in a small, flat clearing surrounded by endless pines. No one designed it to be comfortable, just durable, just survivable. It was the coldest, quietest place I've ever been. Mark, the team leader, was in his late 40s. The kind of man who believed nothing in the world couldn't be fixed with a wrench and a cigarette. If he didn't understand something, he dismissed it. He was the skeptic. Ben was 22, jittery, constantly checking shadows, reacting to every sound like it might kill him. He was the overreactor. Me, I just wanted to get paid and get out. The first week was uneventful, mind-numbing routine. We restored backup power, cleared drifts away from the perimeter, and ran diagnostics on the equipment. The bunker was stocked with canned food, heating oil, and a mess of scratchy government-issue blankets. We even had a satellite radio, though it mostly spat static. It was on the 8th day that things started to go wrong. The weather forecast called for light snowfall. What we got was a whiteout so heavy it erased the outside world. Snow hammered the bunker for 3 straight days, screaming across the metal walls so violently it felt like the building was being sandblasted. We couldn't leave. Not to check the array, not to use the latrine, not even to step outside for a breath of fresh air. We were sealed inside, like specimens in a steel jar. It was during that storm that the small things started. The first happened around 10 p.m. on the second night. Mark and I were playing cards at the small fold-out table. Ben was on the top bunk pretending to read, though he hadn't turned a page in over 20 minutes. Then we heard it, a heavy metallic clunk. It came from the short corridor between the main room and the front door. Not the walls, not the ceiling inside the bunker. Mark froze, cards in hand. What was that? It came from the hall, I said. He took a flashlight and disappeared around the corner. A moment later he came back, holding a red fire extinguisher. Fell off the mount, he said. Wind vibration. The explanation fit, sort of. The storm was shaking the entire structure. Still, there was a strange tightness in Mark's voice. He set the extinguisher beside the door, firmly on the floor. But 20 minutes later, another sound came. Not a clunk this time. A scraping. A dry, deliberate, metallic drag across the outer wall near the ceiling. Ben sat up instantly. That's too big to be a mouse. Mice in the ventilation, Mark snapped. Happens all the time. Oh, but the scraping wasn't small, and it wasn't frantic like an animal. It was slow, purposeful, like someone running a tool across the metal, siding, searching for weak points. Mark marched to the wall and banged his fist twice. The sound stopped immediately. None of us went back to sleep easily. When the storm finally ended the next morning, the world outside had transformed. Snowdrifts 5-6 feet high. Quiet. Untouched. The kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound unnatural. Our first job was digging out the door. It took nearly an hour. Ben watched from inside, pale and anxious, while Mark and I dug. I was clearing snow near the left side of the entrance when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A line in the snow, perfectly straight, thin, maybe an inch wide, 20 feet long, running parallel to the bunker wall. Too perfect to be natural. Not a shovel mark, not a sled, not a fallen branch. It looked deliberate. Mark, I said, come look at this. He walked over, followed the line with his eyes, then looked toward the tree line. Wind shear, he said instantly, or a piece of roof metal dragged during the storm, but it hadn't snowed since the storm ended. Whatever made the line had done it afterward. I didn't say anything, not yet. I followed the line to where it ended, at the corner of the bunker. The snow was deeper here, piled high against the wall. I pushed aside a layer with my boot, and something dark peeked out from beneath, a snapped piece of thick, plastic-coated wire, maybe 3 feet long. The type used in the seismic junction boxes. Both ends were broken clean, not torn, snapped. I picked it up and felt my chest tighten. This wasn't wind. This wasn't old debris. Something had torn this cable free recently. Mark, I called, this is sensor wire, and it's freshly snapped. He looked at it for maybe half a second. Old, he said, tossing it aside. Probably got buried last season and blown loose. Don't start imagining things. But he didn't examine it, didn't look at the break, didn't ask where I found it. Back inside the bunker, the air felt different, heavier. Like whatever was outside had followed us in, not physically, but in presence. Ben was watching me, wide-eyed, like he could tell something was wrong. Mark sat at the radio, tapping the dead receiver with a strange, stubborn determination. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop replaying the contradictions in my head. The scraping on the wall, the perfect line in the snow, the freshly snapped wire, and above everything else, Mark's reaction to all of it. Immediate dismissal, absolute denial, and a kind of hostility that didn't fit the situation. It wasn't just that he didn't believe me. It was that he refused to even consider the possibility. That night, the tension was suffocating. The three of us existed in silence, pretending to read, pretending to sleep, pretending to be normal. But Mark never stopped watching us. Around midnight, I finally spoke. "Mark," I said quietly, "we should check the sensor array before the next storm hits." "It's working fine," he said without looking up. "The wire was snapped," I insisted. "The casing might be damaged." He turned his head slowly toward me, his expression flat, almost emotionless. "We'll check it in the morning," he said. "Go to sleep." But I knew waiting wasn't an option. If something or someone was trying to access our equipment, it was better to know now rather than later. The next day, under a pale gray sky, we hiked up to the array. The snow was deep, soaking through my pants as we moved. Mark walked ahead of us, shovels in hand, silent. When we reached the first junction box, I saw immediately that my suspicion had been right. The small metal port where the wire should have fed in was bent outward, warped in a way no animal could have managed. Something had tried to pry it open. I didn't even need to speak, I just pointed. Mark didn't look, didn't acknowledge it, didn't break stride. He walked straight past me to the farthest sensor, half buried in snow near a thick stand of pine trees. And that's where he stopped. I saw it before he could react. A footprint, not an animal's, not ours. A human boot print deep, wide, with an aggressive snow tread, much larger than our sizes. Someone had been standing right where we were standing now. I looked at Mark, expecting shock. Instead, I watched him do the single most unnerving thing I've ever seen. He lifted his shovel, turned his foot, and obliterated the print with a quick, grinding twist. Then he smoothed the snow over it like it had never existed. "Bare print," he said calmly. "Don't start panicking." He didn't believe that. Not for a second. And the fact that he said it so easily, so quickly, without even glancing at the shape of the print, that was when the real fear set in. The fear of the thing outside had been bad enough. The fear of the man inside was worse. We walked back in silence. Ben kept glancing at me, waiting for some explanation, but I had none. There was only one thing I knew for sure. Mark was hiding something, and whatever he was hiding was connected to whoever was out there. The next 2 days dragged on like a nightmare. Mark kept the key to the door on him at all times. He guarded the radio. He never let Ben or me step outside alone. Ben whispered to me when Mark wasn't looking. "He's acting weird, Samuel," he said one afternoon, wiping moisture from the freezing wall. "He told me the satellite phone battery is dead. It was at 90% yesterday. I saw it. I didn't know how to answer." We had 4 nights left until the snowcat returned to pick us up. 4 nights trapped in a metal box with a man who was either lying to us or protecting someone dangerous. That night, I couldn't sleep, not even for a second. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow felt alive. Around 3 a.m., Mark's snoring stopped abruptly. I froze. 10 seconds of silence. Then, the soft rustle of a blanket. I kept my breathing steady, pretending to sleep, as I watched him through half-closed eyes. He dressed quietly in his thermal layers. He put on his boots. He grabbed a black backpack from under his bunk. He didn't take a flashlight. Then he moved to the door, slow, careful steps. He unlocked the first bolt. Ben didn't stir. He unlocked the second. Then he stepped outside and pulled the door gently shut behind him. He didn't lock it. He planned to come back. I waited 10 seconds, then crept to the door's reinforced window, pressing my face to the icy glass. Mark wasn't leaving. He wasn't checking equipment. He was walking in a strange zigzag pattern across the clearing, heading toward the same pine stand where the footprint had been. Under the moonlight, the snow glowed silver. I watched him kneel by a large tree and uncover a small hollow in the snow, a hidden stash. He opened his backpack and pulled out food, 2 large sealed bags packed with non-perishables taken from our supplies. Then, a thick wool blanket, military issue. He tucked the supplies into the hollow like he'd done it a dozen times before. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a stiff metal wire, and used it to draw a perfect straight line in the snow. A signal, a marker, a path, right toward the woods. My breath fogged the glass. Mark wasn't sabotaging anything. He wasn't trying to hurt us. He was leaving supplies for someone out there, someone he had been feeding, night after night, long before Ben and I realized we weren't alone, and that someone had already tried to get into the bunker. Mark walked back, locked the door, and went straight to sleep like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep at all. At dawn, the snowcat arrived. Mark smiled like everything was normal. Ben and I kept quiet, too afraid to say a word. As we loaded up to leave, I looked back at the bunker one last time. At the tree line. At the perfect straight line Mark had drawn hours earlier, barely visible under a thin veil of new snow. And far beyond it, just inside the shadows of the pines, I saw movement. Slow, deliberate, watching us leave. Mark never reported anything unusual. He quit a month later. Ben refuses to talk about the outpost at all. And sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the world goes silent and the cold compresses everything, I think about that straight line in the snow, and I wonder if someone is still following it. This happened when I was 26, living in a small, historic town in upstate New York. It was a town that sold its history all dark wood, cobblestone streets, and the kind of heavy, wet snow that clings to everything and muffles the world completely. My apartment was on the third floor of a Victorian-era house. The house was owned by an elderly couple who lived on the first floor and rented out the upper two. It was an old place, and in the winter, the draft was constant. The pipes groaned, and the floorboards sighed with every step. My roommate was a woman named Chloe. She was the one who could always talk me out of my anxiety, the skeptic who lived with me. For 2 years, we'd been perfect anchors for each other. The weirdness started with the keys. Specifically, the key to our shared front door. The apartment building had 2 main locks, the main street door, and then our personal apartment door on the 3rd floor. We each had a set of 2 keys, and we rarely used the main street door key, as the owners often left it unlocked for contractors or deliveries. One snowy Tuesday night, Chloe and I got back from work, freezing, and she went to hang her coat on the wall hook. She paused, reaching into her pocket. "Did you borrow my street door key, John?" she asked. "No." "Why?" "It's gone. I distinctly remember putting it in the zipper pocket of my wallet this morning before I left. It's not there." We searched for 10 minutes. Her coat pockets, her bag, the small entryway table. No key. "Must have fallen out in the car," I suggested. "We'll find it tomorrow." Chloe was meticulous. Her entire life was organized into color-coded spreadsheets. The loss of a key, especially one she was certain she had, completely derailed her. "It didn't fall out," she insisted, running her hands through her hair. "I didn't even use that pocket. The last time I saw it, it was clipped inside my wallet pouch. It was a small point, but it lodged itself in my mind." We went on with our night, but the loss of the key had unsettled the house's deep quiet. The next morning, I was alone in the apartment. Chloe had left for an early shift. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I noticed something on the small, square corkboard above the phone charger. It was a corkboard we used for grocery lists, utility notices, and takeout menus. Pushed into the corkboard, right through a utility bill, was a key. Not a key. The key. Chloe's missing street door key. It was unmistakable. It had a small, unique scratch on the brass, like a tiny lightning bolt. I stared at it. It was pinned by a black thumbtack, as casually as a shopping receipt. I felt a cold rush of adrenaline, followed by a dizzying sense of confusion. I pulled the key off the board, holding it in my trembling hand. How could it have gotten there? I was the only person home. Chloe hadn't been in the kitchen this morning. I hadn't gone near the corkboard since last night. If it had been in the apartment, why wasn't it on the entry table? And why would either of us pin a key to a corkboard? I immediately called Chloe, my voice shaking. "I found your key," I said. "Where? Did it drop behind the sofa?" "No. It was pinned to the kitchen corkboard, right through the electric bill." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "John," she said, her voice flat, "I didn't put it there. And you definitely didn't put it there." "I know," I whispered. "So who did?" Chloe immediately fell into her skeptic mode, reaching for a rational explanation. One of the landlords must have come up to check the radiator or something, saw the key on the floor, and not knowing whose it was, pinned it up for safekeeping. It's an old couple, John. They're probably forgetful. It was a plausible, calming explanation. I wanted to believe it. But the next night, something else went missing. The first floor of our apartment was dominated by a large, antique fireplace built into the wall. On the mantelpiece, we kept a few decorations, mostly cheap ceramic knickknacks, and a small silver-framed photograph of Chloe and me, taken at a mutual friend's wedding the previous summer. I remember the photo clearly. We were both laughing, standing on a lawn, slightly out of focus. It wasn't a valuable photo, but it was a personal one. When I got home from work on Wednesday, the second night after the key incident, I walked into the living room, threw my coat down, and immediately noticed the gap on the mantel. The silver picture frame was gone. I searched the room immediately. Under the couch, behind the curtain, on the bookshelf, gone. I checked with Chloe when she got home. Did you move the frame? Maybe to dust? Chloe looked at the gap, her skepticism finally beginning to crumble. I didn't touch it, John. I haven't dusted in a week. Now the fear, not the panic, but the cold, creeping fear began. Someone had been in our apartment, twice. Once to remove a key, and once to return it. And now, they had taken a personal item. But how? The main street door was often unlocked, but our apartment door was never left open. We each had our only keys. We checked the windows. All were frozen shut, the old metal latches securely in place. There was no sign of forced entry, no disturbed snow outside our window. We need to call the police, Chloe said, her voice shaking. Someone is entering our apartment. And what will we tell them? I asked, my voice edged with defeat. That someone took a $10 picture frame and pinned a key to a board? They'll think we're crazy. They'll tell us to change the locks, which will take 3 days and cost us a fortune. We decided to keep watch, just like I had done at the cabin. We'd stay up, alternating turns, until we were too exhausted. The psychological weight of the situation, the violation of our private space without any sign of physical violence, was crushing. It felt intimate and terrifying. On Thursday, the third morning, Chloe left for her work training. I woke up, alone, to a cold, overcast day. The whole house felt empty. I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, and my eyes immediately went to the corkboard. And there it was. Pushed into the corkboard, just below where the key had been, was a square of thick, white cardboard. It was the white backing board from the silver picture frame. On the board, secured with 4 thumbtacks, was the photo itself. The picture of Chloe and me laughing at the wedding. But it was different. It was changed. The image had been completely and meticulously cut in half, from top to bottom. The line was perfectly straight, severing the photograph right between Chloe's body and mine. The left half, the half with Chloe, was pinned up. The right half, the half with me, was gone. The photo was the same. The silver frame, however, remained missing. I stared at the corkboard, paralyzed by a shock so profound it felt like an electric current. The act of cutting the photo, of only leaving one half, was a chilling message, a signal of preference, a selection made. The terror wasn't the loss of an object. It was the realization that the intruder wasn't a thief. They were an observer, a voyeur who was not only entering our private space without our knowledge, but was also making a precise, personal statement about the contents of our relationship. I backed away from the corkboard, my eyes still fixed on the severed photograph. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call the police, to call anyone, to simply run out of the building. But before I could dial, I saw one more detail. Down the hallway, leaning against the radiator in the gloom, was the silver picture frame. It wasn't empty. It was holding a single, new photograph. A photograph that hadn't been there the night before. I forced myself to walk toward it, my whole body resisting the movement. I picked up the frame. The new photo inside was a candid, high-resolution shot. It was a picture of me, asleep in my bed, taken last night. The sheet was pulled up to my chin, and my arm was draped over the side of the bed. The image was perfectly clear, the room only dimly lit by the moonlight. But the most horrifying detail was what my arm was draped over. It was the missing half of the original wedding photo, the half with my image, which had been carefully placed on the floor beside my bed, and in the new photo, my hand was resting right on top of it. The intruder hadn't just been in the apartment. They had been in the bedroom, standing over me while I slept, taking a photo, and arranging a chilling tableau that spoke volumes about their access and their intent. I threw the frame down, the glass shattering with a sound that ripped the silence. I was beyond panic, into a state of pure, primal flight. I grabbed my coat and fled the apartment, down the 2 flights of stairs, past the bewildered landlords, and out into the cold, muffling snow. I drove straight to Chloe's training center, pulling her out of her meeting, telling her we were leaving and never coming back. The police report was predictably inconclusive. No one had seen a thing. They chalked it up to a stalker, likely a neighbor, and told us to change the locks and be more vigilant. We never returned to that apartment, leaving all our possessions behind. I never got the key back, but I also never forgot the fear, the paralyzing knowledge that for days, a person had been living around us, entering our secured home without a trace, and not wanting to steal from us, but to collect a part of us, one severed photograph and one stolen frame at a time. And even now, years later, when I wake up in the dark, I still check the floor beside my bed, terrified of what piece of myself might have been placed there while I was dreaming.